Welcome! In this video, we will try to answer an important question in rural regeneration. How do you transfer a promising practice from one region to another? In our research on ruralization across Europe, we have identified quite some promising practices, and it would be great if other rural regions could benefit from them. But as each village and each rural region is different, the promising practices are not one size fits all. That's what the term transferability means. A result, or in our case, a promising practice, cannot simply be generalized for any other context or region. We have to check carefully how and to what extent it can be generalized or transferred to other settings. It's a bit of a challenge, as we are not talking about cooking recipes. Still, I'll come back to the idea of a cooking recipe in a bit. We used scientific methods to understand how transferability can be enhanced. First, we identified promising practices from the case studies within our research project, and then we evaluated their potential for transferability. To do so, we conducted more than 80 workshops with the final aim of understanding how to best transfer these practices to a different context. But what should we actually do to transfer practices from one place to another? Rural regions are as diverse as the examples in these pictures. Even more. Now, let's imagine that in each of these locations you want to prepare a dish for a festive dinner. It's kind of obvious to say, but even if the dish is similar, in each of these settings the ingredients would be different. If the recipe calls for sugar, some would use cane sugar, and others might use beet sugar. Others might not use sugar at all and turn to honey, for example. Cooking methods would also differ. Some would cook using a fire, others using an electric stove. If we translate this recipe example to our promising practices and transferability situation, that would mean that not all promising practices can work out for any setting. You have to make a choice based on the availability of resources, the ingredients, and the similarity of administrative and governance structures, the cooking methods. And even then, you will probably have to adjust some of the ingredients and methods instead of just copying everything. For sure, there are multiple ways to transfer a practice to a different context. I will present you one possible approach step by step. What we learned from our research is that there's definitely a need for bottom-up and collective participation from the grassroots level. But to ensure the transferability of practices in rural areas, some common barriers need to be addressed. These are mainly lack of human capital and access to land. Here, top-down measures prove to be helpful. For example, local public administrations are able to provide innovative training and learning opportunities for rural residents. Or they can link the new ideas and practices to available financial resources from European and national projects. Institutions can even provide incentives to municipalities to address the issue of access to land by, for example, allowing to turn unused and abandoned land into new agricultural land. On the other hand, bottom-up and collective participation are crucial to adapt any practice to the local context and adjust it to the local available resources. To start, the key players or stakeholders within a given context need to be identified. Most likely, you'll end up with a very diverse group of people, and actually, it will be a good thing. Still, it can be challenging to create a collective spirit and get them into a flow. A facilitator or a person that moderates the process can be helpful. Based on our experience, facilitation would also help the community to identify their collective needs and their strength. Talking about strength, the capital framework is a good way to analyze them. Let's have a brief look at it. The capital framework is an approach that aims to structurally assess the strength, capabilities or resources of a context or a person. These are called capitals and are classified into 7 categories that you can see in the slide. This approach takes into account that, for example, a place can have a biodiverse and healthy nature, while the built infrastructure might be in a very bad condition. Or it can have reliable networks and local cooperation, but an average financial situation. Such an analysis will help to understand a setting and take into account strengths and weaknesses. We use the so-called resource wheel as a tool to visualize the set of resources, or capitals, for a given context. After analyzing the available resources and the community's needs, you should select a practice to potentially transfer that would address these needs and make use of the local resources. Proceeding in this way, the motivation and engagement of the community will be stronger, and the capacity to overcome difficulties and remove barriers will be higher. The outline procedure is just one possible approach. However, it is not just about implementing each single step. Great importance has also to be placed on laying foundations for good cooperation amongst all stakeholders involved. Indeed, something very important that emerged from our research was that some sort of coordinated interaction among stakeholders is always necessary to achieve common objectives. Most of the time, the primary objective was to build strong community relations, but sometimes it was about solving a specific problem. Thus, collaboration and cooperative spirit should be recognized as crucial, and creativity, time, and possibly also money should be used to help the stakeholders involved to build trust amongst each other and enjoy working together. The starting point for any process of development and implementation of a new practice should be based on local resources. However, the process should be conducted considering that non-local forces could strongly influence the outcomes, negatively or positively. For example, the lack of a national strategy to counteract rural depopulations means that less people can work the fields, having a negative impact on new agricultural practices. But non-local forces such as regional, national, and European public and private networks, funding programs or subsidies can have a positive impact by providing financial and logistic support to local initiatives. To sum up, what is important when you transfer a practice from one place to the other is to be aware of the differences in the two contexts and to play to the strength of the context where you want to apply the practice. In order to find the best possible way to do this, it is crucial to involve local stakeholders and to identify objectives, strengths, and weaknesses together. Finally, the potential impact of transferring a practice will also depend on the available resources to remove structural barriers.